It's time for another Village Voice, the podcast about community. And I've got a very special guest this time because he is all about community and has been for a very long time now. His name is Jason Hilder, and Jason is an old friend as well. How are you, Jason?
I'm very well, Peter. Thank you. Good to see you and good to hear from you as well.
Likewise. And where are you right now? It looks as though you've got an amazing background of buildings behind you there, but I guess that's probably a background rather than where
It
you're actually sitting.
certainly is. Peter, I'm in Albury Wodonga at the moment, and that is the Wiradjuri peoples, traditional peoples where they come from, and currently travelling down through the south of Australia, visiting communities as we go.
It's something you've been doing for many years, Jason, in that your tertiary education essentially has been fully based around community. Could you outline a little of that so that people have a knowledge of the work that you've done?
Certainly. Well, starting before academic immersion, I first was at a life point change just shortly before my daughter was born. And we were living in the Netherlands, and I was part of the corporate model and living in a quite an affluent way lifestyle in Europe, and questioning, hang on, something's not quite right here. And in the deeper I looked at the corporate model and societal model, and that led me to Findhorn, which in the background, my background there is a picture of Findhorn, the village, which is in Scotland, Findhorn Foundation. And that sparked this moment of, hey, there's another way of living possible, another way of society possible as well. And I spent years of just cursory reading, exploring, and then in 2014 I decided to fully immerse and went and applied to do a PhD looking at intentional communities around the world, and was successful in that application and also in a scholarship to help me fund that. And that was from 2014 to 2021 that I was immersed in and exploring primarily eco-villages, but also co-housing.
Jason, it has felt for some time that this is the direction that our world needs to go, and yet in Western society, there's quite a lot of resistance to I guess the co-housing, co-living model because it does break away from that whole story, I guess, of the rugged individualist who does life for themselves. Uh, uh, I know now that you've spent quite some time with this, since 2014 at the very least, and with interest prior to that. And I suspect that you would also report that it's not an easy journey to be able to fully embrace the kind of living that Findhorn is promoting, the kind of living that eco villages promote. Can you tell me a bit about your journey around those challenges?
Yeah. Well, for my own part, and all of the journey that an academic journey or a practical journey, a lived experience journey, they're all very similar in the direction forward and also the findings, interestingly. When I first began this journey, I, like many others before me, be they academic or not, had quite a utopian mindset of, wow, there's another way of living possible. And it's utopia meaning unreal and also unachievable as well, in the words of Sir Thomas More. What I've found in that is that the more I immersed in with a sense of utopian or even rose-coloured glasses, very quickly I found not the shadow underbelly, but a different perspective of what it means to live communally and what's required to live communally. And what I noticed is passion is very, very important driver. Passion and an awareness of that something's not quite right in the society that we have, and seeking towards something that is a better way of living. and challenges that often come up with me personally. So to speak to it, I've visited nearly 45 communities. I've lived in 8 communities, and during my PhD, I visited 11 communities, both in Australia and Europe. So there's definitely I wear a set of glasses. Yes, I wear a set of glasses, but I wear a set of uh, glasses that have viewed different lives from different communities. And that combined with my own experience, it's become more and more apparent to me it's not an easy journey for a collective of people to choose to live near each other or with each other, and then go through those steps and get a sense that of course, there's monetary aspects and membership aspects and things like that. But I guess the most obvious to me of the challenge is that we humans have evolved over thousands of years from tribal to village-like to city-like. And as we've done so, we've become more individualistic, more me. And it's my perception that on the planet at the moment, we are the most individualistic that we've ever been, some more than others. In that, what that means is that we tend to separate too, and tend to have my things or my community or my home or my car. And that's a yearning for humanity. And yet at a core level is this, hang on, I'll speak for myself, and I imagine I'll speak for many. I deeply yearn to spend time with other people. I deeply yearn to do things with other people and build with other people. And that means me relearning from the individual back to the collective. And I perceive that is where humanity's got a lot of challenges at the moment, because it means that we do have to relearn to communicate, relearn to make decisions together, relearn to share our resources.
Yeah,
And
that's
then from that
quite a
is,
journey. Yeah, go on, please.
and from that falls out that, well, how much does it cost and who owns what and all of those practical intricacies. But to me, at the core, it's the relearning how to do things collectively.
One of the things that has been presented in many sociology studies is that at times of hardship is when we find ourselves more able to do things collectively. That is, while things are easy or feel somewhat comfortable, we tend not to want to do anything other than that. But it's like genuine hardship is when people actually draw their energies together and recognize that what is good for one is good for another. Do you think that perhaps in order to fully embrace the community pattern, the ones that you and I have both been working on now for over a decade, uh, perhaps a great deal more hardship has to be present in order to make it work?
Yes, I won't use the word sad, but it is a concerning uh, paradigm within the human psyche that we do need that adversity. And Peter, you and I had some discussions weeks ago, and I'm sure I'm not bringing anything new to the table, but it feels important to bring it to the table again, is that at this present time, we have not just a national, but a global housing unaffordability and availability crises. I'm just reading a report by the World Economic Forum that 1.6 billion people across the planet now in a housing stress. And by 2030, there will be 3 billion. And to meet that, this isn't my report, this is from the World Economic Forum. To counter that, we need to build 96,000 affordable homes per day to prevent against that crisis going to a point of catastrophic. So that is one, is the housing. The next is that we are in it doesn't matter which end of the spectrum the environmentalists or the non-environmentalists are. We have an environmental crisis, and we are seeing just this week earthquakes, fires in Western Victoria. It just goes on and on and on. So we're having an ecological crisis. And then add to that some of the highest levels of suicide across the world, social separation, family breakdown. So that's the third crises. And then to add a fourth, of which there are many, we're having cultural crises in every country, an intermixing of cultures. That culture is being eroded or being made a monoculture or something like that. So to me, these things are hurting more and more at the individual and also the family and even the town level. And yet, when I read the mainstream media, it's almost like the movie Don't Look Up, that there is a glazing over of the real issue of housing crises or the ecological crises. I don't wish it to happen, but I perceive that it is going to happen very soon, that there is the overlay of the housing crisis, the economic crisis, the ecological crisis, that actually we do have some disasters. And that is the time, unfortunately, that people, or fortunately, unfortunately, people have to come together and say, crikeys, we literally have no housing for 1,000 people. What do we do now? I'm of a big believer to have the awareness, enough intelligence, enough reading, enough awareness of looking at society. And part of why we're traveling is to look at a society across Australia and say, crikeys, let's not continue to wait. I use the word wait because for me, the word wait actually has a lot of weight in it, waiting, when there are multiple solutions around the world. Let us take action. But to come back to your original question, perhaps we are at that time right now of that urgent stress. Could be ignorance, or it could be just an apathy. This is so big, we can't deal with this, so let's continue to consume, or let's continue to watch TV or something like that. Yet the reality, as I perceive it, and many do, is that we have got crises now, and it requires urgent action now.
We've got a situation in the Northern Rivers of New South Wales where it's been reported that 40% of people are not housed correctly. And I recently saw a news article that said the Moreton Bay City Council have decided to fine van living people and so on, people who are living rough, to fine them over $8,000 for either having a pet or being caught living in their van or in a tent. So it seems that politically there is no energy for resolving this. It's basically please go away, and then finding them the sort of amounts of money that clearly they don't have access to, or they would not be living where they're living. So, from a political perspective, we also can look at both state and federal levels in this country, and I suspect in other countries, and notice that the monies spent on warring and the monies spent on, well, everything but housing, correct housing for people, is endless. Like billions upon billions of dollars, almost $500 billion spent on several submarines, and yet here we have in a wealthy region, supposedly of Australia, 40% of people incorrectly or insufficiently housed. Once again, it does present the opportunity perhaps to say, now we need community housing, now we need co-housing, now we need community living. And yet, I know that just recently, an associate of mine, Shane, has had to take himself west because here on the coast there was a block to creating an eco village. And so he's now had to go to a region further west where they were willing to welcome people because, well, everyone's heading to the coast. And the mindset, I guess, is the mindset of those who have rather than those who have not. Is there, in your opinion, a more simple way through this or a more balanced way through this than having to wait until we're in a collapse position or in such a difficult position that those without proper housing outnumber those with proper housing.
Peter, I at the beginning of when I was doing my research, I read Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, which is a really big, thick book.
I know the book, yes.
Jared Diamond, for those people listening who are not familiar, Jared Diamond being a previous, I believe he was a petrochemical engineer, traveled the world with mining companies and was seeing the disaster of what mining was doing around the world and changed track completely and started to look at environmental aspects. And when I was reading his book and he was looking at how societies grew and then collapsed, and a key message in his work that he said for the very first time in humanity, if one part of the world collapses, we all collapse. As before it was Rome or the Incan Indians or something. If they collapsed, it actually didn't matter in the rest of the world. Now we're all interconnected.
Yes.
I think it's very concerning. You before answering what I perceive as some solutions, of which there are many, perhaps during the PhD, I was really encouraged to identify the problem, which was frustrating as hell to me because I wanted to identify the solution. But in the academic sphere, you always look at what is the problem to identify the solution within that or without that. And I perceive that it's quite squarely that, and it actually says it in the World Economic Forum report that I was reading today, that housing has transitioned from a social good to an investment mechanism. And that
Yeah.
is key element of why we're having not just Australia, but worldwide economic challenges. Because a house is a profit generating mechanism that a person can buy 1 or 10 or 15 or more of them to generate a passive income, in my opinion, at the expense of people who then are priced out of the housing ownership mode. Now, that's one perspective. If we couple that with negative gearing, it was introduced by John Howard's government, which actually set the tone for Australian housing industry to become an investment generating mechanism. And our real estate agents, like I do my best, I practice Buddhist ways of being, and I do my best to have compassion for real estate agents. It's actually really challenging for me because a real estate agent's whole perspective that it's actually legislated. They have to sell the property for the most they can get for the owner. And that, again, generates this increase in housing costs. So we could go into a lot of the other. Please, I would like to acknowledge, I'm not blaming John Howard. I'm not blaming people who have an investment portfolio or real estate agents for that matter. But what I am saying, it is part of an overall machine that says housing is about profit. Let's get more houses so we can get more profit. And those people who rent, well, they're actually just paying for it. Now, if we can step towards solutions, I don my hat to Shane Sylvan Spring, as you mentioned before, to go into more regional or rural area to bring about change. In the journey that my partner and I, we started in Sunshine Coast, seeing the unaffordability there and the lack of council and state government support for these types of things. So I started traveling. So I've been traveling for the last 9 months and also for the last 10 years too, but more in the last 9 months. And everywhere I was going. So we went along the coast, up to Rockhampton, Yeppoon. There I saw homelessness. I saw wealthy enclaves of profit-generating estates or new housing developments that were curb channeling, 3-bed gyprock house, same old as the next house, and unaffordable. In my estimation and the world standards, that's unaffordable. And I saw a lot of homeless people at libraries, and I saw a lot of homeless people sleeping at the back of community centres, and as you're driving through town under the bridges. It is a real problem everywhere.
Yes.
Now talking to solutions, in a nutshell, I perceive the peri-urban areas, so that's the edge of regional towns, there's land availability and land affordability. And it's also where people are doing it tough in regional towns. I believe there's a lot of perspective for co-housing and eco-village in regional towns throughout Australia. And it's actually a really hard road to bring about new developments in cities or in major cities because of the planning system that is designed for the traditional mum, dad, mum and dad, two kids, three-bedroom house.
Yes.
And the reason why I suggest the regional areas is in regional towns, people generally do a little bit of village living anyway. They know their neighbours. They go to the markets. People work for other people who work for, so there is a village
Yeah.
mentality already in
They,
play.
they talk to each other and they wave at each other and they say hello and they wish each other Merry Christmas and all of those
Yes.
quite traditional value things that are connected to village living or to town living. Yes.
Yes. And that can happen in suburban areas too, like West End in Brisbane, for instance, or I'm sure there's parts of Melbourne, and every major centre has it too, but perhaps it's a little more challenging because of the cost of living and pace of life. So I'm suggesting the regional towns, and there is another aspect, and that is to go to where a group of people go and live. So the photo that's in the background for me is Findhorn, and that was where three people went bush basically in northern Scotland and started a movement. So that's possible in Australia. It's bloody hard. It's bloody hard to go bush and to build something new from scratch. I think it's possible, but it's hard. And I'm suggesting it may be a little easier, actually perhaps a lot easier, to do it on the edge of rural towns. The challenge there is that rural towns often have a conservative council and a bit of NIMBYism, not in my backyardism,
Yeah.
and a perception of, well, collective living isn't that hippies? Isn't it those weirdos who want to live in a caravan with and not, be on the dole or whatever the perception may be? So, so to me, a solution is the regional towns, not just the only one, but a solution. And I would also add to that is a process. Is it okay to talk of the Aquarius Festival, which
Of
actually started?
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's okay to talk about anything here, but there will be some subjects we won't cover. They're not all that community.
sure. Um, so during my PhD, I had the incredible good fortune to be able to read all I could about this thing, community, village, co-housing, eco-villages. And what popped up interestingly in Australia, and by default the rest of the world too, was the Vietnam War, which was a time on the planet where a lot of people being active said no. And that led to the flower power movement and the Aquarius Festival movement and a great resurgence of music around the world, where people pretty much en masse, young people, no, society is not going the way we want to. We're going to go another way. And that was what sparked the intentional community movement in Australia.
Yes.
And to a point where there was, like I estimate, before me, Bill Metcalf, who's another academic, and I totally respect Bill. He's a veteran in the academic research area of this. They estimated there was around 20,000 people living in hippie communes or in the hippie trail during that time who had gone away from society and said, well, let's go bush. Some of those communities still exist today. A lot failed. Interestingly, 30, 40 years later, we're now having another resurgence of people going bush or
Yes.
people wanting to, even in urban areas, to collectivise. And I perceive now it's a lot more mature. So people have more awareness of property legislation, of financing, of how to grow food with permaculture, things like that. So my spirits are really lifted at the moment. Yes, while there are these challenges, people are also actively doing it, and they're pretty cluey. I'm, I don't like to call
You're
myself
one of them.
cluey, but I'm giving it a really good go, as are
Yeah.
many people. And yourself too, Peter, through the Village Matrix. It's a mature time now. By mature, I mean there's enough systems, there's enough mechanisms, there's enough heart as well, that people are collectivizing in small or large amounts to say, hey, let's do this and do it better. And why I perceive that that's more mature, we have things like Co-Housing Australia, which is a national. I've just joined and been nominated. I really appreciate the ability to be part of that group, and recently was nominated to be the chair of Co-Housing Australia. So we have
Mhm.
Co-Housing Australia, we have Global Eco Village Network, we have New Economy Network Australia, which is about different ways of shared economy. We have so many economic movements, collective movements, sociocracy movements that are bringing all of that knowledge and maturity to the table. It's an exciting time. Mm.
It is an exciting time, and that's and yet still in some ways a pioneering time, and hence quite a challenging thing to stay focused with. And I want to bring you back to you mentioned several times of the World Economic Forum,
Yes.
because statements have come from the World Economic Forum that have said such things as "You will own nothing and you will be happy." And if we look at the kind of investment that is occurring across the US and more recently across Australia and other countries around the world, but certainly in the US, a large proportion of homes are now owned by investment companies, namely BlackRock and Vanguard, and there's one other as well. But they handle trillions of dollars in investments, but have also recognized that the financial investment into houses is a genuinely yielding investment, and so that's where the bots are taking them. I think this also presents a real challenge in that this in ownership in a house as an investment has now become a stock market matter and is a corporate matter.
Yes.
Uh, there's a is there is part of the maturity of this movement also a group of people who are protesting that, essentially saying, well, we don't need to outright own, but we do need to know that we're not paying a corporate body for the right to live somewhere. That also seems valid in the community sense.
Yes. Peter, I have explored this is quite a bit and looked at the psyche of why there was this love affair for having own house and aiming towards a married couple aiming towards having their own home so that they could retire and the children could have their houses. They could help them get their houses in the future. And that's called a housing life journey.
Yeah.
And previously that was quite linear, particularly after the Second World War. Mum and dad had kids. You could afford to put money away and have a home and then help the kids to get the home.
And followed through with that was you can also have your own washing machine, your own
Yes,
vacuum cleaner, your own lawnmower, your own essentially everything.
yes,
You can have wealth because we won
yes.
kind of experience.
And a key tenet of that was that mum and dad stayed together and that the kids were healthy and went through uni or trade school or whatever it is, and they got married and stayed together. And with modern society, there's a whole another discussion that sociologists could go into in depth. we don't have a linear housing life journey anymore. It is up and down with a divorce, sickness, cancer, people losing a job mid-career, et cetera, a business folding, mental health challenges, all of those in the mix. They were probably already there before, but never as obvious. Now we don't have that linear housing journey. So it is a lot harder to have that consistent build up over time to build equity in a home.
Well, yes, and we don't
And
really have a linear employment journey to go along with that. That is,
no,
there
no,
is no such thing anymore as, the gold watch after 50 years of service to one company, which
yes.
was the kind of financial model that really fitted the banking model that fitted the ownership of your own home model that was portrayed perhaps from the 50s through to about the late 70s.
Yeah. Now, if we add into that housing, you can rent a house out to someone who's paying the mortgage and do this thing, negative gearing, it is a no-brainer. By a no-brainer, it is an easy mechanism for a person or a group or a corporate to have one house, 10 houses, 100 houses under a
Yeah.
portfolio. And my perception is there's no point fighting that. There's no point losing sleep over that or something. My perspective is, what are the alternatives to that can work with that, not against it, because it's so large and difficult to fight or things. What are the mechanisms that can work with it? And I'm very excited in the last 2 years to see the community land trust movement, the cooperative housing movement that is growing around the world, and mechanisms where people are having a lifetime lease, for instance, instead of owning title. So it's changing the perspective of how you live in a house. I lived in the Netherlands for 6 years and was really excited to see different models over there. And I also went back there during my PhD to the Netherlands, to Italy, and to Scotland and Germany. And what's very obvious in Europe is you can rent a house for 25 years and it is yours to paint and put new tiles in the bathroom, or have a balcony veggie patch or something like that, and be there. That's your home for 25 years. So within Europe, there is the ability to rent for a long time. So it's not this thing where you're renting and then 12 months later going to be leaving. There is also the ability to have cooperative ownership. So one person has a share in many houses. And just very recently, even this last week, I've been talking with a group here in central New South Wales that they've been working on a model for 20 years for cooperative village investment. So they are at a point now where there's enough people who believe in this cooperative model that the cooperative can become a bank for people wanting to set up a village, as opposed to needing to go to the traditional banks or the government. So circling all the way back to that, Peter, I perceive it's just creating an opportunity for an alternative, and that is something around collective ownership of land and buildings and collective finance of land and buildings. And people might say, well, that's socialist or that's communist, for instance. Maybe. And yet it has happened for thousands of years. It's not a new thing. It's quite a new thing, really, for me to own my own house.
Yes.
It's a new thing in human evolution, unless you're a lord or an aristocrat or a part of the wealthy. But generally, in human history, it's been you live in a place and there's some form of exchange.
Well,
So
interesting model in Fiji when I visited Fiji. The villages there, and there's many villages. A lot of their living style is in village enclosures, and for each of the villages, there's a chief and then a spokesman for the chief. And the way that a person who grows up in that village applies for a place to live is they don't actually get to own any land. That's they all own the land, or the land owns them. But you know, a young man and his partner might go then to the chief and say, "We wish to be in this village," and the chief will say, "You can build there," and they build their own house on a piece that the chief has said it's okay to build, but they don't claim the land. They just have a house there. Now I know that there are difficulties within their model as well, but it seems to make a great deal of sense that the traditional peoples generally don't perceive that it's possible to even own land. Most traditional peoples will say we are part of this land, and the putting up of a house is much like a bird building a nest or something else inhabiting a cave. It's basically that we need a place to be, and so this is the place we are. And then the land around becomes something that is shared and utilized and cared for. It seems to me that perhaps we need to backflip a little into a model that, as you say, has operated and worked for millennia.
Yes. Yeah. And perhaps, Peter, rather than a backflip, it could be a forward flip. And I'm being a little facetious there, but a forward flip of what worked tribally for thousands of years, and then what's worked in this sort of semi-modern era, the neo-modern era, and what's the best of that, and what's the best of this, and forward flip from that.
Yeah.
And I perceive very interesting. You mentioned that the land owns people don't own the land owns people, and I'm quite inspired by the community land trust and the that models that associate with that, because the land can never be sold ever. It is in
Right.
perpetuity forever. It belongs to the land. It belongs to this movement. Even if the movement grows and wanes and thinks that the land can never be sold. And that has value over 7 generations, over 5 generations,
Yeah.
over 3 generations. Land ownership can be taken. So if I go out with $1 million and buy a block of land or a house and think, well, that's my title and I can do whatever I want on that land, to some level I can. But also at another level, that land can be taken away if it is for a new road going through it, or there is a mineral deposit, or so that a perception of having land owned, and therefore I'm the lord of that land, is a little bit of a fallacy. Yes, there is truth to it, but it's also a little bit of a fallacy.
Yes.
Whereas if 500 people own a block of land under a community land trust or a company or some form of cooperation, it's a lot harder to have that land taken over for another use. It still can happen, but it has more longevity in it. And again, there's a sense of, actually, I want to go back to, or not go back, but go forward to a point. Peter, the thought, and I often talk about this with people who say, imagine for a minute all the energy that you put into buying a block of land and a house and mortgage and all of those sort of things. And you're then retired and you're able to sit back and enjoy those things. Great. Some people can achieve that, others not. But imagine if all you're doing is going to work, enjoying living, growing food near people, sharing some level of care of each other in an area where you know your neighbours, and you didn't have to go through a mortgage forever. And you didn't have to go through the long-term, in my opinion, soulless journey of trying to get that success factor I own my own house. That's a success factor. I have
Yes.
a different success factor, and that is how much do I know people around, and uh, where's the food growing? And do I know the kids next door, and those kids next door know me? And is there
Yes.
uh, a chook growing area and a veggie area close by that, there is this shared food. Those are success factors to me. And my encouragement to many people I talk to is, what are your success factors? And nearly always, not always, but nearly always, it comes back to some pretty simple things that we could go back 500 years ago and they were probably similar: to be living in a village-like setting. Yeah.
To know that you have the support of those around you, to know that you have food that's going to be available to you, to know that you will have the care of others as you grow older, to know that the children don't have to depend on one person to raise them, but in fact, an entire group of people will give them a whole range of perspectives on life.
Yes.
Yes, that there is a way, and that it is a developing way. It is something that is a forward flip. It is happening. And at the same time, you and I are both somewhere in that forward flip, and both facing the challenge that it is not something that is opening with ease. This is a forward flip that where the safety net has been taken off the trampoline.
Yeah.
So it's quite a navigation to move forward. And yet, you've mentioned that there are growing organizations. I'm particularly interested in for Village Matrix, particularly interested in the bank arrangement that isn't traditional banks, because we are about to move on a property that gives us a whole range of options. And right now, we don't have the money, so we're looking for a whole range of ways to secure that property. We have the opportunity for a negotiation, and any way in which we can find the finance, I'd like to investigate further. I want to
Yes.
speak with you also just very briefly about your own situation. Traveling for 9 months to various locations sounds to me like you might well be within that incorrectly, improperly homed group of people. Would that be true?
Yeah, according to the housing situation, if I was to do enter my census form now, we're homeless, yes, and
Ah,
transient, and we have the good fortune to be able to determine a little bit more than others can determine where we go and what we're doing. But it is a bit dicey at times for us. Well, we don't like this area. Where's the next area where we're going to? And of course, employment associated with that. And uh, luckily, we've had a caravan to enable us. It's not the most luxurious caravan, but it is a caravan to enable us to be able to travel, establish research and things like that. Our intention is twofold. We're now in Albury-Wodonga. We're really considering staying here because it is quite central to Victoria, the Melbourne, Sydney,
surplus.
Canberra, things like that, which is
Yes,
my coming future in 2025 will be interfacing with government a lot more. We'll be interfacing with not-for-profit housing providers a lot more. So I need to, for myself professionally, need to base myself in a region that has access to those major centres within a couple of hours. And Queensland's quite spread out. We come from Queensland, quite spread out, and a conservative state politically and legislatively for this type
yes,
of thing. And our intention is I also wear another hat, and that is that I come from a farming background. So I want to live on a collaborative farm with others. I don't want to live in a co-housing in town, and also an eco-village that's very remote. I can visit and be part of, but I want to live in a peri-urban agri-hood, which basically means people growing food collectively on the edge of a regional town. And Albury-Wodonga has possibilities because it's got an interconnected organic and biodynamic and perhaps even some form of collaborative farming area. Yeah. Now so with us, we are at the point where we are wanting to be part of that, wanting to be a pioneer. So within the journey of any new village starting, there's pioneers. And I would say I don my hat to you, Peter, and others, that you are pioneers for what you're doing. So I'm prepared to be and wanting to be a pioneer for a new village. And we have also visited other villages on the way, like Narara Eco Village and Crystal Waters I've lived in, and places in Queensland, and haven't quite found it hasn't gelled with me. And that's a large part because of the heat. It's a lot cooler here in the south of Australia. And the other component, and this is only a very recent thing, because there's now clarity of a financial model, I'm at the edge of joining with others to be a developer. And what that means is to go into the true sense of development, which means come together with others to collaborate on a community vision and then partner with them to deliver exactly what it is that they dream. And to partner on that journey and to be able to bring in the relationships with the financial model, the legal model, and also something we haven't talked about is the social architecture model. And so I perceive that 2025 is going to be a busy time for me and others to, I wouldn't say radically, but to really increase the number and the perspectives, the number and the locations of small and large villages throughout Australia. I set the intention about 4 months ago to facilitate the development of 100 villages by 2030 and to improve the lives of 1 million people in Australia. And that is a massive, bold statement. I'm not going to do it alone, not interested in doing it alone, but I am willing and rolling up the sleeves to take action on that because it's needed. Homelessness is there and people are disconnected in different regions in Australia.
Jason, Hilder, thank you so much for your time. Yes, maybe we'll talk again about social architecture, which is a large part of what we've been doing with the village. And
Yeah.
of course, coming up against all the things one does rub up against when one makes an effort to design the social architecture or have it design us. Uh, I also invite you to be as active a part as possible in the developments of Village Matrix as we move forward, because yes, I think we're on a very similar path. I'm excited in these times to be able to embrace the pioneering spirit. We have a property that is already an operating business, already an operating farm, and we're looking to pursue that immediately. And I know you know a little bit about it. I'm sure we're going to engage and involve you more in making it a reality for Village Matrix. And I wish you so well with you developing all that you're doing, as you've put already more than a decade into becoming one of the major leaders in this nation in this field. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me, and I look very much forward to speaking with you again very soon.
And Peter, I don my hat to you and the team and the growing team at Village Matrix for the incredible work that you're doing there. Yeah.